Hello everyone. I'm just sitting down to film the other half of that last video that I was talking about the process to getting a prospect, whether it's for service work like Higgins's, or for sport or showing like Shasta originally was, or for being a hunting dog like my husband's dog Pistol is. Regardless of the reason, the process is the same as I said in the last video. I'm going to be continuing on from the point where I stopped in the last one. So if you haven't seen that one, go back and watch that one, because I'm not going to go back and say the information there. So this might not make sense to you if you're just watching this one first. I do have some notes on a used envelope, so that I stay a little more on task here. So the parts that were left to cover were how to kind of figure out going with a breeder or a shelter or rescue, how to choose the individual puppy or dog, and then the last thing was like options or considerations for getting the dog to you from the breeder or the shelter. So I'll go over breeders first. And I'm just going to go over kind of like a pros and cons, because you will have to weigh for yourself what is better for your situation. So I'm just going to kind of, again, like I did the last video, lay a general baseline and some considerations to kind of help guide you for making your own decision. So some of the pros with breeders are kind of obvious. The options to get, there's a lot of options with a breeder to get a young, well-bred or purpose-bred dog or puppy that has had all the proper health testing for that breed, and has that testing back in the lineage. At least, I like to look for at very least 3 generations as a minimum. And you'll know what health tests to ask the breeder if they do, because you'll know that from when you looked up and figured out your breeds list. Part of that is looking at the care requirements of the breed, and in doing that you'll see what health issues are prominent in that breed and should be screened or cleared in breeding dogs. So you'll know that of whatever breed you choose, and you should definitely be sure. That's one of the ways to find a reputable breeder, is to look for all those health testing, and don't just take someone's word for it, like, hey, did you do these tests? Yeah, I did them. Ask to see the paperwork, because if they are an ethical breeder and they have done these tests, they will not be upset at asking to see the proof of those tests. So that's one of the pros for breeders. You kind of know the history and the at least the health history for sure, of what you're getting. And that kind of goes along with another point, is that a lot of people will think with going with a breeder, a lot of people will think that just means for puppies, because most cases it actually does. We got Higgins as a puppy from a breeder, which I will share his breeder's info in the description if you're interested. If you happen to come up on a poodle as matching you well for your next prospect, and if you're looking for a service dog or therapy dog or something of that sort, MyTyme Kennels is his breeder, and she has some really nice lineage. She's a good ethical breeder, and I will be linking her information in the description if you're interested. But anyways, get back to this. So some That's what I was saying. That's my notes. So sometimes with breeders, you can actually find a adult dog that's available, and this might be because, say, an example would be the dog was kept by the breeder for a specific job or titling, so for like show titling or for you know, whatever else, whatever the breeder, depending on your breed, whatever their focus is, um, and they may have been able to title in that, and then now they're looking for either a guardian home or um, or they might be selling them for one reason or another. I mean, there's a lot of different reasons, um, and that's something that you can find usually. If you're looking for that, it might take you a little bit longer to find that than a puppy. Obviously, puppies are way more available from breeders than adult dogs. But you can find adult dogs if that's what you're looking for. And the benefit of that, the reason that it's in the pros section, is because that can come with a lot of perks because the breeder is going to be ethical breeder is going to be skilled in that breed that they're breeding, and they're going to have worked with that dog, and that dog's going to have skills. It's going to have training on it, so you're going to get a lot more with that dog. um, and let's see, what else do I have on here? um, so the next couple points are um, knowing, you get the benefit of knowing um, what you're getting basically. So um, you're essentially starting with a clean slate. So that's a benefit. That's a pro of with breeders, getting a dog from a breeder versus a shelter. Um, you can really kind of like that start from scratch. You're not wondering, how the dog's going to react in different scenarios because you are either already know there's a history of it, or it's a clean slate. The dog has never been in those environments, and you can build the reaction, basically build the response in those environments through training. um, the other piece to that is you have the ability to get a lot more, what I would say, solid or um, overall information from health testing, or not health testing, sorry, temperament testing. I already talked about health testing. um, Temperament testing can kind of gives you a lot of information about what that individual dog's going to be like. And I'll touch more on that in the shelter side of why it's a little more, um, I don't know, like more steady information on the breeder side. But I'll explain that in the shelter side because it makes more sense to explain it over there. Um, and then obviously we look at some cons of going with a breeder. So what might be deterring for you from going with a breeder dog? And the first one is obvious, it's cost. They are going to cost a lot. Typically, depending on it varies hugely depending on breed and age of the dog, how much training's on the dog. But it's typically going to be, from most common breeds, it's going to be a couple $1,000s for a well-bred puppy. Um, and again, that's going to range hugely depending on the breed, depending on your area, just a lot of different things. So that's really going to range, but it's obviously going to be more of a cost than getting a rescue, of course. Um, Another piece would be uh, traveling or shipping expense to get the dog to you from the breeder, whether you're going to go pick a puppy or dog up, or whether they're going to ship them to you, or you're going to hire a pet transport to bring them to you. Whatever that's going to look like, the cost is going to be on you for that. Um, it's not gonna, the breeder does not include that cost typically in their, puppy costs. Of course, that's kind of, that's on the buyer. So there is a further expense there. Um, Typically from well-bred lines, you're not going to have, hopefully, depending on your breed again, and depending largely on how you raise them. So that's a huge point. But typically you're not going to have as high of like vet costs and stuff, because you know that most of the main issues, if not all the main issues in that breed, are already screened. The parents are already screened. The grandparents, the great grandparents have been clear of all those things. So there's a little bit of a payoff with a breeder being the puppy costing more in the beginning versus hopefully not having to pay as much later in life, as the dog ages and would typically have these health things come up. So that is another good point under a breeder. Another point I just want to talk about, it's not really necessarily a pro or a con, I don't think. I guess it would depend on what you're looking for and how you're looking at it. I think it's more of a pro than a con. But I could see some people looking at it as a con, I guess, in certain ways. But that is, with breeders, you're going to be looking at contracts. So there's going to be contracts to sign that are binding for the breeder, but also for the buyer, on what you can and can't do raising the puppy. For example, Higgins, he is required by contract to remain intact, so he's not allowed to be neutered before it's set forth in months, but it's basically before 2 years. At 2 years, he is required to be neutered, and that actually fit right into what I was looking for, because he is going to be doing light mobility work if he passes all the testing for that. The plan is that he does that, and leaving a male intact until after they're all done with their growth and everything is going to be better for him, and that's something I already wanted. He's snoring. And also, I don't ever have any intention of breeding him, so having him in the contract that he gets neutered after that is not a problem to me. I don't really have a preference whether he stays intact for his life or is neutered, so it really didn't matter to me. So that's just another thing to consider, is that each breeder is going to have a bit of a different contract, and you want to pay attention to what's in that, and do know that it is binding, and the contracts are there for really good reasons. Just make sure that lines up with what you are looking for, which is what you would do when you're looking for a breeder. Is you're going to be looking for a breeder that lines up with your wants, I guess to say. I'm not sure how to say that right now, but you're going to be matching to a breeder that is, let's see, how do I say that? It's escaping me how to say that right now. But basically, that's going to be covered in that too, because you aren't going to want to go with a breeder that completely has a different outlook. I guess that's the way. You want to look for a breeder that has the same outlook and desire and breeding towards the same qualities in the breed that you're looking for. So like with Higgins, his sire is a therapy dog, and his mom is also a therapy dog, and therapy dog is obviously different than a service dog. There's a lot of information out there on that. I'm not going to go over that, because if you're wondering the difference, you can look it up. But it's different, but the base temperament required for both jobs is pretty close. Speaking of like drive towards working and uh, level of energy, stuff like that. An on-off switch, as they'll say, is all pretty similar. The one main difference between the two is like, um, of course, a therapy dog is for other people versus a service dog is for a single person. So the main difference in the puppies there might be puppies that are more outgoing to other people versus a puppy that's more centered on the handler. But that's going to be show up in individual puppy temperament testing, and also that a lot of that has to do with training the puppy and raising the puppy, because you do want them, a service dog, you want a service dog to be confident, so that can look like as outgoing. um so a lot of that is dependent on training as you raise the dog. um but you do want to, back to my point, is you do want to look for a breeder that is breeding towards what you are looking for in a dog. So if you're looking for a hunting dog, you're going to look for a breeder that hunts their dogs. Um, if you're looking for a show dog, you're going to look for a breeder that actively shows their dogs, has titles on their dogs in the show ring. Um, so it just or same with a sport dog or tracking dog, anything that you are looking for, you want to see that breeder that you choose actively doing that with their dogs, and also seeing that puppies that they've had in the past went on to do really well in those fields as well. So that's really important. So now let's look at shelters or rescues, stuff like that. Let's look at the pros and cons going that route. So obviously the first thing we think of is, okay, that's definitely less expensive than buying a dog from a breeder. Um, the initial upfront cost of the dog is less. The kind of side thing to that, which would go down in the cons, is you might not always know the health history of the dog or the parents. So that could lead to more expenses later with vet bills and whatnot if an illness arises. You don't really have a way of knowing that um, when you're actually looking at the dog to pick out the dog. Um, so obviously there's a draw to rescuing, because you're homing a dog that otherwise doesn't have a home. Um, I don't think that it would be smart to not pay attention to that factor, because that does mean a lot to people. Um, and it's a good thing, you know, makes you happy to be able to home a dog that otherwise doesn't have a home. But if you're looking for specific, which is great if you're looking for a pet dog or a lot of different other scenarios, is it's a great way to go. But I would just caution, if you're looking for specifically for a service dog prospect, be really careful, because then the history of the dog really, really matters, because that dog has to be good in all scenarios, and there's not a great way to test that. So just be careful there. If you're looking for a service dog prospect, um, it you just have to really kind of be careful, know what you're looking for. Um, do temperament testing that you can in as many environments as you can, and um, like there's a lot of different things you can do with that, but just be really confident in what you're doing, and always make sure that you have an out, so you have a plan. If it doesn't work out, is the shelter doing a trial period for you, or are you in a position to then keep that dog and get a different dog for a prospect, or do you have someone in mind that you could rehome the dog to? Like, there's those things that you really would want to have set up ahead of time if you went the shelter route. Um, let's see. So I kind of started touching on some of the other points here. Um, uh, so mostly you're gonna find adult dogs. You can find a lot of young adults in a lot of like adolescent age in shelters. And if you're patient and really look, you can find puppies. That's definitely something that you can find if you're looking for a puppy from a shelter. It's not as common as adult dogs, but it's definitely, you can definitely find it. Um, uh, so yeah, adults and puppies can both be found. Um, Another thing with shelters is there's many different breeds and mixes can be found. Usually the more popular breeds and mixes will be found, but if you're not looking for a super rare type breed, then chances are if you were patient and look long enough, you'll probably be able to find that breed or a mix of that breed in the shelters. So that's kind of a pro because there's, um, I mean, I would put that in the pro category just because, uh, kind of like availability. It sounds like a weird word to use there, but um, it's just there's the most popular breeds, of course. There's more of them, so more of them end up in shelters for various reasons, and that makes them easier to find in shelters. Um, Another pro is with transportation. So if you're not really close to the shelter, or if you don't have a way to get the dog from the shelter to your home, um, most rescues and shelters will have the ability to transport the dog for you, or will have someone that they know that could transport the dog for you. Not all of them do. He's dreaming. Wonder what he's dreaming about. Big growls. But so yeah, so transportation can be a little bit. You can get some help in that realm. Um, Usually it's not. It's either not going to cost or it's not going to cost very much. It would a lot of cases it might be something like cover the fuel expense, something like that. Um, and then the last pro I had on here was I already kind of touched on it, is most shelters and rescues will provide a trial period. So um, it's a period of time where you are kind of testing out the dog and seeing if it will work out for you or not. And in that time, if it doesn't work out, you are able to bring the dog back to the shelter and potentially try a different dog or whatever. Um, so that is a really good thing. If you're looking at a shelter or rescue, be sure to ask that facility if they offer trial period, because that's a really beneficial thing if you're going this route. Some of the cons are kind of obvious. People talk about them a lot, so I feel like they're kind of obvious. Obviously, there's the not really knowing what you're gonna get, which I kind of already touched on that too. But they can. I mean, a dog coming from a shelter typically is gonna come with a history, and you might not be able to know what that history is. So it's kind of trial and error finding that out. Um, and with the temperament testing, which I do recommend you either learn how to or take a skilled trainer with you to do the temperament testing on shelter dogs. If you're not skilled in dog body language, definitely take a professional with you who is. Um, Temperament testing is very important with shelter dogs. However, the reason I say that it's a little different, in my opinion, with shelter dogs versus a breeder's temperament test on a puppy is because a puppy can kind of be put in an environment that it's not used to, say in a room or part of the yard that it's never been in, and you can run the temperament test and you kind of get a pretty clear result on how the dog is, because it's a puppy, because it's not really had a history. When you are working with a adult shelter dog, it has a history that you don't know what that history is. um, I would really encourage, if you are able to, do some temperament testing in multiple different environments. So you might temperament test originally at the shelter in one of their rooms or something, or out on a run, but see if they'll let you take the dog out for a walk, or take the dog somewhere where it's not been before, really, and then do temperament testing there again if you can. So it gives you a better idea of how does this dog react to different situations and different environments, because they may have had something happen to them that would make them fearful in one environment and okay in another. So I already said about it can be harder to find puppies, but they are able to be found. It can be harder to find an exact breed. I kind of already talked about that, but it can be harder to find an exact breed that you're looking for in shelters if it's not a popular breed. Um, and I talked about the temperament testing, and I think I already touched on the vet expenses. Did you just kick your sister? You stinker. Vet expenses later on could end up being more just because it's an unknown. You might not know if there'll be more. That's not to say that shelter dogs are typically less healthy than breeder dogs, really. It's just that unknown, so you don't know if that dog is going to be the most healthy dog that you've ever had, or if it's going to be the dog that really breaks the bank on multiple vet visits because it has a issue from, its great grandparents that's been passed on through its lineage of poor breeding or something like that. So it's really the unknown factor, not necessarily that they're less or more healthy. It's that you don't know what you're getting. So then moving on to how to go about choosing the puppy, from whether it's from a shelter or breeder. I kind of already alluded to a lot of these points, but I'll go over them again quickly here. So obviously temperament testing. And even first, are you too warm? You want to get down? It's okay. You can get off. Yeah, you get too warm, don't you? Get your last leg off. There you go. Yep, he's gonna go lay. Put his head up on the dog bed. Yes, you're a good boy. I'm good. So, let's see. So, even before, I'm gonna back up before the temperament testing. So how to choose a puppy or dog, part of that is gonna be, already, kind of, how am I gonna say that? It's gonna be already, you already basically have a checklist in that original wants and needs columns, and if you don't know what I mean, go back and watch the previous video, the part 1 to this, because that's where I talk about that. So in that list, you're going to already see things that you can use when looking at an individual dog as well as looking at breeds as a whole. Because each individual dog is obviously going to have its own personality. So that's going to be your first starting point. But then there's temperament testing, which you can use that in conjunction with. I don't know if that's how you say that. Words are not my friend today. But you can use that together with that needs and wants category. Shaz, stop licking. It's probably very noisy on the camera. Okay. And like I had said, especially with shelter dogs or any adult dog, to test in different environments if you can. Testing different environments is not as crucial with a puppy, I feel like. And then another thing to consider with the individual puppy or dog would be, most of this applies to a puppy, but considering, even you already have, okay, you're going with this breed, you know roughly the size and build of this breed, but each individual puppy is going to have a slightly different size and build as well. It's kind of hard to tell when they're a puppy. Just because they're a small puppy does not mean that that's going to be the smallest one. Like, the runt of the litter is not always the smallest one then they grow up. But you can tell a little bit, especially if it's from a breeder where they've tracked their weight and their growth um, from newborn up until usually that's going to be 8, 9, 10, 12 weeks, somewhere in there is where breeders most of the time are going to home their puppies. So a good ethical breeder will have tracked the growth of a puppy through that time and will be able to show you that, and you can compare the whole litter on that and see, okay, this puppy has consistently stayed growing, this much bigger than its siblings. It's always been this bigger, much bigger than this dog. Two puppies in a litter. This puppy's always been this much smaller than this puppy that's always been this much bigger, and that's going to continue to grow that way. So that can help you if you're looking for a difference in size, even in the breed. And also, I mean, even different breeders will breed smaller or larger in the breed standard. With Higgins, I was looking for a larger standard poodle. He is still in the standard. He is still a standard poodle, but he's on the larger side. Where I was looking at two different breeders at the time I was looking at getting him. I really liked both breeders just as much. But one was having puppies that were going to be on the smaller side of the standard. Again, still in the standard for a standard poodle, but on the smaller side. And due to the really light mobility work I want him to be able to do, I'm looking for one on the larger side. So there's even that fluctuation within the breed. Then there's fluctuation within the individual litter of dogs. So that all that is something to consider and to look at. Let's see. Yep, initial wants and needs list. Okay, yeah. So go over that initial wants and need versus needs list that you made as you look at each puppy's temperament test. So kind of like weigh it against that original idea that was in your mind of what you were looking for, and look at which puppy has the most points on that temperament test that fit exactly what you were looking for. And all those pieces, like all that falls into the same category. Some things in that would be drive. What level of drive do you prefer? Like, are you looking for something that's more lively, or well, that's activity. Something more lively or calm, that's activity. But drive is more like desire to do something, desire to figure something out. Does the puppy just give up, or does it really try to work out the problem? And for service work, you would want one that tries to work out the problem. So, and then, what do you prefer? I'm looking down at my notes, so I keep looking down here. And then, so what do you prefer motivation-wise? Like, what do you prefer that the dog is motivated by? And you can look at that in most of the temperament tests. Will have a section on what were they more driven by, whether it was food, praise, or toys. I think are the three things that are typical. Sometimes play. And so you can kind of look at that and say, well, which type of motivation in a dog do I prefer to work with? I was really excited to see that on Higgins's test, he was much more praise driven than he was food motivated. And that can differ as a puppy, because it depends. Did the puppy just eat before the test? Did it not? Like, there is pieces to that, but it has rung true with him. He is very praise motivated, and I enjoy working with a dog that is praise motivated. A lot of people really like working with a dog that's very food motivated, especially in service dogs. I see a lot of people talk about building food motivation all the time, and talk about that in a different video, which I actually have in past videos, but you don't need it. If you enjoy it, then that's great, but you don't need a food drive in order to have a dog that trains really well. It can be, there can be food drive, there can be praise drive, there can be toys, there can be playing or doing an activity. Like, it doesn't really matter what the drive is so much. Something's going to drive the dog to do things, and you just have to figure out what drives that individual dog. But in the temperament test, you can look at it and say, well, I would rather work with a dog that is food motivated versus toy motivated. So that can be a factor in deciding which individual puppy, something like that. And then after all these other, you go over your wants versus needs list and all that. Obviously, the needs come first, and then the wants. And after all that stuff, then you can start considering things like individual coloration on a puppy or something like that. But don't have that be your deciding factors, because all this other stuff, the temperament, is so much more important. And in the long run, if you get a dog that's well matched to you, you're not going to care. You're going to bond to it just fine. You're not going to care what color the dog is in the long run. Like a year from when you get it, you're not going to care what color the dog is, because you're going to have a great dog that really fits you. Whereas if you go purely with coloration, and I'm just using color as an example, but I'm speaking of really any like superficial quality, I guess, to the dog. But if you go with, oh, this dog doesn't really match me, but I love how it looks, so I'm going to get this puppy out of this litter. Well, if it wasn't a good match to you, a year down the road, you're not going to like the dog as much because it's not going to fit your lifestyle as good. So that really makes a difference. So don't choose your dog by, a lot of people will say, oh, this puppy picked me or something like that. Like, you're going to be way better off if you follow those different parameters to really make sure which puppy fits your temperament and your lifestyle. That's going to mean way more than, oh, this puppy came up and laid in my lap and sat with me the whole time. Or it's going to mean more than, oh, that one's the cutest one. Or, oh, I like that one because it has this little marking on it right here. Those things a year, 2 years down the road are really not going to matter. Where temperament a year, 2 years down the road is really going to matter. So just consider those things. And then the last category I'm going to talk about, it's a very short one, is, which I've actually kind of already talked about throughout this, but it's getting the dog to you from the breeder or the shelter. And you're going to want to consider this when you're looking for, when you're early on looking for a breeder or for a shelter to get a dog from. That's when you're going to want to consider this, because are you willing or able to travel to get the dog? Are you going to have to rely on the breeder shipping the dog? Do you have a pet transport person that you know that can ship the dog for you, or a friend that can go pick it up for you? Those are all things to really consider. And if you are planning on going to pick up the dog, what mode of transportation are you using to do that? Are you driving in a vehicle? Are you flying by plane? Like, what are you going to do? And talk with your breeder on that and see what their opinion is on those points too. Because each breeder will have a different opinion on how they would prefer their dogs and puppies to be transported, because they're going to know from over the years of having done this what works best for that breed. So let's see what else. And it's actually, yeah, that's another good point. I'm glad I wrote that down. I would have forgot. Some breeders or shelters won't ship. They won't allow you to get a dog if you're outside a certain area. Um, for example, kind of a quick side story is I was down in Florida, staying with my aunt, and just on a trip, and I went with a friend of hers to a shelter, um, to do some volunteer work there while I was down there because I love dogs. I like doing stuff with the dogs, and I wanted to go see their shelter and work with the dogs there. Um, and I was, for a couple of days, I would go there and take out different dogs and work with them a little bit. Um, I enjoyed kind of like seeing what they knew training wise, letting them have fun, just spending time with them. And there was one little pit bull there that was just a sweetheart. I still remember her name. Her name was Tulip. I love that little dog. I would have taken her home in a second, but living in Michigan, I wasn't allowed to. She would not adopt out of state, so I was not able to get Tulip. So that's something to consider. Is definitely ask the breeder or ask the shelter if they're willing to ship or sell or adopt out to you because you're, X amount of distance away from them. So don't forget to ask about that before you get super far into the discussion with them on which dog you're looking at. And different breeders or shelters will sometimes they'll allow you to adopt when you're farther away, but they require a certain type of shipping. So some will allow the dog or puppy to get flown to you, and some will require you to come pick them up. Some will say it's okay to ship the dog or puppy in cargo in the plane. Others will say, no, we're not willing to do that. We require you to come and get the puppy and have the puppy come back with you in cabin, which I think is a good choice. Just my personal opinion in there. It is rough for a puppy to fly cargo, so that's just another point to consider. And also, if you do find a breeder that is ethical, some breeders do ship cargo, but they will wait. Then if you are going that route, you will have to wait longer. Typically, you're gonna wait several weeks longer, because it's harder on the puppy the younger they are. So the older they are, the easier it's gonna go. Sometimes it's because of vaccine records or updates. Sometimes it's just the breeder's preference. But anyways, that's something else to consider. And I personally don't recommend shipping a puppy in cargo if you can help it. And something to consider that we have done before is there are pet transport people that's their job is to they have usually like a van or something that's set up for it, and they will pick up from the breeder or the shelter or whatever, or previous owner, whatever, and drive the dog or puppy to the other owner. And that expense, no matter what you're doing, as I talked before, that expense is usually going to be on the buyer, if you're going with a breeder. I can't read my writing. Oh, yeah. Okay. Wow. I couldn't read that. So the shipping idea too is that's if you don't want to go see the place, see the shelter, see the breeder's facility, or home. If you want to go see that, you're obviously going to have to go and pick up the puppy yourself. Personally, I like to see where the dog I'm getting it comes from, so I really try to be able to go, which travel's really hard for me, so that's a factor. It's going to be different for every person's scenario. But I feel like it is, if you're able to at all, it is beneficial, in my opinion, to um, see the environment that the puppy or dog is coming from. I just find that helpful. So yeah, that's all my points. I was going to do a bit of like a story time telling about um, this whole process with Shasta and with Pistol and with Higgins, but since this is already a long one again, I will do that in a different video. So I might break it up to where I talk about each individual dog in its own video, where you get kind of the whole story on that dog. I think I might do that. Um, I don't know if you guys would like to see that. Let me know. And if you have any comments, put them down below, and I'll talk with you about whatever I can. If I can answer a question, I will. If I don't know, I'll tell you I don't know. So, remember to always keep learning. That's important. Do your research. If you're looking for a dog, definitely do your research. I talked a lot about that in the previous video about how to do that. And if you like this video, or if it was helpful, like it. If you know somebody that it would help, share it. And if you enjoy this type of videos, subscribe and comment down below to let me know if you like this type of video. So I hope you have a good day. Hope this was helpful. Bye.